Welcome back to Occult Archives. You know, the show where we crack open history's most, well, let's just say controversial books, the ones that folks whisper about, the ones with the reputation that precedes them. And today, we're going deep, like really deep.
Yeah, we're talking The Key of Solomon the King.
Episode 154, by the way, for those keeping track. Now, this book, this key, it's not just some dusty old relic. This is like the ultimate source code. The DNA of Kabbalistical magic, the stuff that shaped a whole lot of how magic was done back in the day, especially all that medieval ceremonial stuff.
Right, and for centuries, this wasn't something you could just pick up at the bookstore.
Yeah.
This was passed down in secret handwritten copies, hidden away.
Exactly. So consider this your all-access pass, folks.
Yeah.
Now, we're working with a specific version put together back in 1888 by this guy, S.L. MacGregor Mathers.
Mathers, yeah.
Yeah.
And he didn't just translate one text, he went all out.
Yeah.
Dug into count them, seven ancient manuscripts.
Yeah.
They were tucked away in the British Museum.
Oh, wow, 7. So, like, comparing notes, seeing what lines up, what's different, that's...
Add MSS, 10,862. Sloan MSS, 30307 and 391. Harleian MSS, 398 and 91. King's MSS, 288. Oh, and Lansdowne MSS, 1202 and 1203. A real treasure trove.
Can you imagine piecing together all those bits and pieces? And I'm guessing they weren't all in pristine condition, were they?
Oh, not at all. You have the usual, fading ink, pages missing, that kind of thing. But the real headache, especially for Mathers, was the Hebrew.
Ah, the Hebrew, yeah, the language of magic.
And in the Pentacles especially, it was mangled. Like generations of scribes copying and recopying, and, well, things got garbled.
So it was more like a magical code-breaking mission than just a straightforward translation.
Oh, absolutely. Mathers spent years, literally years, trying to figure out the correct characters, the correct words, the original Hebrew, and the magical symbols. So his edition is a restoration project almost as much as it is a translation.
It really gives you a sense of how precious, how guarded this knowledge was. Now, the name itself, the Key of Solomon, it's got that ring of power to it, doesn't it? It's like the ultimate source of wisdom. And of course, it's attributed to King Solomon himself, right?
It is, and this isn't just some made-up backstory.
Yeah.
The idea that Solomon was this magical powerhouse goes way back.
Oh, yeah. Like, how far back are we talking?
Josephus, that Jewish historian from the 1st century, he mentions magical texts that were straight up credited to Solomon.
Wow. So it was already circulating back then.
And it's not just a Jewish thing either. Across a bunch of Eastern cultures, even in stories like those Arabian Nights tales, Solomon's always portrayed as this master magician. So yeah, the name carries a lot of weight. It tells you this wasn't just any king. This was the king of the arcane arts.
Now, before we get too deep into this specific key, I got to make sure everyone's on the same page. There are other books out there, right, that get slapped with the Solomon label.
All right, you got to be careful. You might bump into something called the Grimorium Verum or the Clavicola di Salomone Ridotta.
Those don't quite have the same vibe as our key, though, do they?
Not really. Those lean more towards what you'd call black magic grimoires. Very different in their whole approach and what they're aiming for.
And there's the Lemegeton, too, right?
Yeah, sometimes it gets called the Lesser Key of Solomon, which, kind of makes it sound like a sequel.
The Lesser Key. Sounds almost cute.
Well, it's mainly about summoning different spirits and knowing their seals. Interesting stuff. But our key that Mathers put together, it's a different beast entirely, so we're sticking with that one.
All right, so within this key we're exploring, how is the information laid out? What are the main sections?
It's got 2 books, just like how Mathers found it in those old manuscripts.
Yeah.
Book 1, that's like your foundation. All the basics you got to know to get started, how to avoid screwing up experiments, how to work with spirits, all that.
Okay, so avoiding any magical mishaps. Got it.
Right, think of it as your magical safety manual. Then book 2, that's where things get really interesting. It dives into all the different ways you can actually put this knowledge to use, all the rituals and preparations. And like we said, Mathers skipped over some of the, let's say, more ethically ambiguous stuff.
So he was kind of curating it, picking and choosing what to include. All right, well, our goal today is to give you a crash course, a highlight reel, if you will, of this Key of Solomon. Like, we're going to distill all this ancient wisdom into something you can actually wrap your head around.
And hopefully walk away with a little bit of that Solomonic wisdom.
Exactly. So, first things first, what are the absolute bedrock principles of this whole system? Where does it all begin?
Well, the book jumps right in, no messing around. Book 1, Chapter 1, it lays down the law. Divine love, fear of God, that's the starting point.
Not exactly what you would expect from a book on magic, is it?
Right, but it makes it clear. Like, this isn't just a how-to manual. It's saying you got to approach this with reverence. You got to honor God, Ask for guidance. Pray with a truly devoted heart. If you want to get anywhere with this, that's where you got to start.
So it's not about manipulating forces, it's about aligning yourself with something bigger.
Exactly. And right after that, it hammers in this idea of timing. Days, hours, the phases of the moon, it all matters. You mess that up, well, good luck getting those spirits to listen.
It sounds kind of finicky, almost astrological.
It is, very much so.
Mhm.
So, like, each day has its planetary ruler. Saturday's Saturn, Thursday's Jupiter, Tuesday's Mars, Sunday's the Sun, Friday's Venus, Wednesday's Mercury, and Monday's the Moon. And in Chapter 2, it says, any magical operation you do, it should be done on the right day, under the right influence, ideally even during the right planetary hour.
Mm.
Like those planets, they're not just up there twinkling, they're actively influencing what happens down here.
So you're tapping into a cosmic schedule, basically.
You got it. So, like, if you want to, say, summon the spirits of folks who guide naturally, Saturn's your guy. You do that on a Saturday during a Saturn hour.
Mm.
Or if you want to mess with someone's building, affect their business, their stuff, Saturn's one to call on.
Sounds kind of intense.
Well, he's also associated with, destruction, death, all that. Not all sunshine and roses with Saturn.
Okay, so maybe not my first pick. What about the other planets?
Oh, they've all got their specialties. Mars, he's the warrior, right? So if you want to summon spirits of people who died in battle, that's his domain. Now, for things like love, kindness, maybe try to become invisible, you want the Sun, Jupiter, or Venus. Those are your go-to planets for that.
Okay, so each planet's got its own, like, magical resume.
Pretty much, yeah. And then you got Mercury. He's the trickster, the communicator. Want to get your stolen stuff back? Mercury can help you out with that, point you in the right direction.
So it's like you're hiring a specialist for each job, but they're planets.
That's one way to think about it. And we can't forget the moon. She's got a huge role to play. Waxing moon, that's for building stuff, bringing things into being. Waning moon, that's more for like banishing, disrupting, causing a little chaos. And when there's almost no moon, that's prime time for invisibility or anything to do with, well, death.
Man, the moon's busy. So you got your planets, you got your moon phases. Is there anything else a budding magician needs to watch out for?
The weather actually matters too. Book 2, Chapter 1 says the ideal conditions are clear, calm, pleasant, no big storms, no crazy wind.
What, you think those spirits get blown off course or something?
Kinda, yeah. They thought the air, when it's all agitated, it makes it hard for spirits to show up, because they're made of a finer substance.
It's like they need a nice, calm atmosphere to, I don't know, materialize or something.
Exactly. And speaking of spirits, the key breaks them down into categories based on where they come from.
Oh, like a spiritual family tree.
Something like that. So you got spirits of water, wind, earth, clouds, solar vapors, and fire.
Wait, solar vapors? What are those, like, sunbeams with attitude?
I know, right?
Yeah.
But each type, it has its own way of showing up. So water spirits, they might come with a bit of rain and storm action. Fire spirits, you might get some noise, some fiery displays. The cloud spirits, they're supposed to be kind of scary looking, like they want to scare you off. And the wind spirits, they're all about speed, sudden movements.
That's a whole lot of variety.
It is. And then there's the solar vapor spirits. Now, these guys, they're supposed to be beautiful, but they're also super vain and proud.
So, like, the influencers of the spirit world.
I guess you could say that. So you got to know what you're dealing with.
All right, so you've picked your day, checked the moon, made sure the weather's cooperating, you've figured out which type of spirit you need to talk to. What's next? What do you actually,
Prepare yourself. That's what you do.
Oh, right, preparation, of course. Can't just jump right in.
No way. This is serious business. For any big operation, the master, the magician, and anyone helping them out, they have to go through a 9-day period of, well, basically giving up all the good stuff.
9 days.
No physical pleasures. Got to be careful what you say. Avoid any idle chatter. Chapter 4 of Book 2 goes into detail about that. And prayer. Lots of prayer and confession. It's like a total reset, body and mind.
Like hitting the spiritual refresh button.
Exactly. So on day 7 of this 9-day thing, the master takes a bath. But not just any bath. This is in consecrated water, the whole body, head to toe, in a private spot. And while they're doing that, there's a specific prayer they have to say. Starts with, O Lord Adonai. You can find it in Chapter 2 of Book 2. After that, clean white linen clothes, only the best.
Sounds pretty ritualistic.
Oh, it is. And the disciples, those helping out, they go through something similar. The master pours that consecrated water over them, head to toe, while saying another prayer. This one's all about being reborn, renewed. You can find it in Chapter 3. Yeah, cleanliness, inside and out, super important.
So you're cleansed, you're dressed for the occasion. Where does all this magic actually happen?
You need a dedicated space. The place is clean, secret, Could be a cabinet, a hidden room, whatever works, as long as it's private and you won't be disturbed. Book 1, Chapter 2 talks about this, and then Chapters 2 and 7 in Book 2 go deeper. Then you got to purify it even more, perfume it, sprinkle it with consecrated water. You're basically creating a sacred space, a place where those spirits can actually manifest.
Okay, so you're setting the stage, making it welcoming for those spirits. Now, I got to ask about the magical circle. It's like the ultimate symbol of magical protection, right? How does the key say you should make one?
All right, so this is where it gets really specific. Book 1, Chapter 3 walks you through it. The master takes a consecrated knife or a sickle or a sword of magical art. All those tools have their own chapters in Book 2, Chapter 8, if you want to go deeper.
So we're assuming you've already got your magical toolkit prepped?
Right. So they use that tool to draw a double circle on the ground, 1 foot between the inner and outer circles, both with the same center point. And then within that space, they got to draw the sacred Tau symbols, facing the 4 cardinal directions. Plus, they place 4 hexagonal pentacles in there, also within that 1 foot space between the circles.
Hang on, Tau symbols? Like, what do those look like?
It's an ancient symbol, a cross shape, but it's been around a long time. It's supposed to be protective, powerful.
Oh, ancient power symbols, got it. And these pentacles, they're not just for decoration, right?
Oh no, they're like serious magical talismans. They're supposed to help you control those spiritual forces.
So it's not just a circle, it's like a whole energy grid.
Exactly. Once the circles are done, the symbols are in place, they light a consecrated fire and a consecrated candle. The candle goes in a lantern, and one of the disciples holds onto that, lights the way for the master during the whole ritual.
So you got your light, your circles, your symbols. What's the master doing at this point?
They're the director, basically. They're giving instructions to the disciples inside the circle, keeping everyone focused, making sure they know what to do, what to watch out for. And the key says, depending on what you're trying to do, you might need to tweak the circles a bit, different setups for different goals.
So there's some flexibility within the system.
Right, it's not just one size fits all.
Yep.
The main point is, that circle, it's your safe space. Book 2, Chapter 8 makes that really clear.
It's like a magical barrier keeping the unwanted out. All right, so you're in your circle, you're feeling protected. How do you actually get in touch with these spirits and, get them to do what you want?
Conjurations, that's the key.
So basically talking to spirits.
Yeah, but not just any old Chad. The master, they face east, unless the spirits they're calling on need a different direction, and then they speak the conjurations out loud, clear, and strong. Book 1, Chapter 3 gives you the rundown. Now, if those spirits are playing hard to get, not showing up, the master's got a few tricks up their sleeve.
Like what? Some kind of magical timeout.
Kind of, yeah. They can raise that consecrated knife like they're going to strike the air. They can redo the suffumigations, which is basically burning incense. If they have to, they can even redraw the whole circle.
So like a magical reset button.
Exactly. And they can touch the pentacles, draw on their power. But if things get really tough, everyone in the circle, the master and the disciples, they have to recite this confession.
We've heard about this confession a few times now. What's the big deal with it?
It's like the ultimate apology. Book 1, Chapter 4, that's where you'll find it. It lists out every sin you can think of. Pride, greed, laziness, gluttony, all those sins of the flesh, stealing, disrespecting holy things, and so much more. It's basically admitting to every human flaw there is.
So it's like humbling yourself before those spirits.
Exactly. It's about showing them that you know you're not perfect, that you're coming to them with a pure heart. It's a way to gain that moral authority, that spiritual strength you need to command these forces.
Makes sense. Now back to the conjurations. What are they actually like? What kind of language are we talking about?
They build in power. Some of them, they use the names of God directly, like names that have huge power. Adonaiah, YH, Eloah, Elohim, Ehai, even the Tetragrammaton.
Those names are serious business.
They are. And they also use stories from the Bible, like Noah's Ark, Jacob's Ladder, Moses and the burning bush, even that story where the earth swallows up those guys, Dathan and Abiram.
So they're drawing on all this ancient religious power.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, look, I'm calling on the ultimate authority here. You better listen up.
Makes sense. Now, what about those pentacles we talked about earlier? Do they play a role in commanding spirits too?
Oh, huge role. You wear the pentacles and the medals around your neck, hold one in your left hand, and you have that consecrated knife in your right hand. Book 1, Chapter 6, that's where they really emphasize it.
So it's like your magical power suit.
Yeah, you're decked out. And if you run into some really stubborn spirits, the nasty ones, there's a special address to the angels. You're basically calling on the big guns, asking for backup from the higher powers.
So there's a whole chain of command in the spirit world.
There is. And the key, even as this final conjuration, they say it's so powerful it can force even spirits who are already bound to someone else to obey you.
That sounds intense.
It is, but it also talks about sending messengers if the spirits themselves can't actually come to you.
So there's some flexibility there.
Right. And once they've done their job, you got to let them go properly. Book 1, Chapter 7 tells you how to do that. It's all about respect, even when you're in a position of power.
Now, the Key of Solomon doesn't just tell you how to talk to spirits. It also gets super detailed about the actual tools you need, the instruments of the trade.
Oh, yeah. Book 2 is basically a magical crafting guide. We're talking about very specific knives, like one with a white hilt, that's your general purpose tool, made on a Mercury day, a Mercury hour, when Mars is in Aries or Scorpio. And then you got to dip it in a mix of gosling blood and pimpernel juice. Oh, and it's got to be during a full moon or a waxing moon.
That's a lot of stipulations for one knife.
And then you got to engrave it with specific characters, like Agla and On. Then you got the black-hilted knife. That one's for the circle itself and for scaring those spirits. Saturn hour for that one, dipped in black cat blood mixed with hemlock juice.
So a bit darker, a bit more intense.
Definitely. And each tool, each instrument, it has its own set of instructions, its own ritual for making it.
Sounds like each tool is like a magical artifact in its own right.
Exactly. The wand and staff, they're usually hazelwood, and there's a whole prayer you say while you're making them, invoking at an AI. The sword, it's got to be a brand new one, cleaned and polished on a Wednesday during a Mercury hour, then inscribed with divine names in Hebrew, plus the words Elohim Gibor, and of course a special conjuration to charge it up. There's even a trumpet you can make, new wood inscribed with Elohim Gibor, Elohim Zabaoth, and some specific characters. It's like every little thing is important, every detail matters.
And it's not just physical tools either, right? Even fire and water, those basic elements, they get their own consecration rituals.
Right. Chapter 9, that's your guide to the exorcism of fire. All the prayers, all the steps to purify fire and make it ready for magical use. Chapter 11, that's about water, how to use hyssop to consecrate it. Consecrated fire and water, they're like your basic ingredients for a lot of the stuff in the key. Even the wax for the candles has to be exorcised. Chapter 12 shows you how. They really wanted to make sure everything was super clean, spiritually speaking.
So it's like purifying your ingredients before you start cooking.
Exactly. And don't forget the writing tools, the stuff you use to draw those symbols and sigils.
Right. Those matter too, don't they?
Oh yeah, big time. Chapter 14 gets into that. Ideally, your pen is a feather from the right wing of a male gosling, plucked while you're saying a special conjuration. Then you sharpen it, perfume it, sprinkle it with consecrated water.
Sounds fancy.
The inkstand's got its own ritual too, made of earth or something similar, engraved of divine names on Wednesday during a Mercury hour. The ink itself, you got to exercise that, call on the spirits Anerton and Simulator, and use the name Adonai. Different colors. Got to exercise each one separately. Chapter 15 even tells you how to make a pen from a swallow or a crow feather if you're feeling adventurous.
So many rituals, so many details. It sounds exhausting.
It's a lot, that's for sure. And some folks might be surprised to hear about the blood, how it was used in some of these rituals. Though Mathers himself, he wasn't really into that.
Blood magic always has that, controversial vibe.
Chapter 16, it talks about using blood from bats, pigeons, other animals for specific purposes. But Mathers, in his notes, he's like, hey, you don't really need to do that. He thought prayer, the pentacles, the incense, that should be enough for most situations.
So like a gentler approach?
Maybe, yeah. Now, what you write on also matters.
Right, the parchment, the paper, all that.
Chapter 17, it's all about virgin parchment. Lots of different ways to prepare it, to consecrate it, special conjurations, specific psalms you have to recite.
Sounds pretty involved.
If it's not super important, you can use paper, satin, silk. But you still got to exercise and consecrate them first. And they even have a whole chapter, chapter 19, about consecrating steel tools. They get their own conjuration, their own set of psalms.
So nothing's off limits?
Nope. Everything has to be prepared. Everything has its place in this system. Oh, and chapter 20 talks about silk and cloth, specific colors, inscribed with words and characters, with specific psalms said over it. That's for wrapping up those tools, protecting them when you're not using them.
It's like a whole ecosystem of magical tool.
It is.
Yeah.
Even the magician's own book of spells, it has to be consecrated.
Wait, their spell book is a magical object too.
Oh yeah, chapter 21 lays it all out. That book, it's got all the prayers, the names and seals of the angels and spirits, all magical characters you dedicate it to God and the good spirits. It even tells you how to write those characters correctly, starting with Ahaya Asher Ahaya and ending with Ein Sof.
Yeah.
And there's a special prayer you say to make sure those characters are actually powerful.
It's like the book itself is alive, almost.
In a way, yeah. Now, one thing that might be a bit, well, let's say controversial for some listeners, is the whole sacrifice thing.
Yeah, I can see that.
Chapter 22 talks about how in some cases you got to make sacrifices to the spirits. White animals for the good spirits, black animals for the bad ones. Usually it's their blood, but sometimes they'd offer the whole animal.
So it was a bit more intense back then.
They preferred to use virgin animals too. And they had specific prayers for when they were making those blood sacrifices. There's also fire sacrifices, using specific types of wood that match the spirit you're calling on, like juniper or pine for Saturn, boxwood or oak for Jupiter, cornel or cedar for Mars, laurel for the sun, myrtle for Venus, hazel for Mercury, and willow for the moon.
So even the wood is symbolic.
Oh yeah, everything means something. And there's food and drink sacrifices too. They'd prepare all this stuff outside the circle, clean cloths, fresh bread, good wine, roasted birds like chickens or pigeons, clear water from a spring. Then they'd summon the spirit by name and say specific prayers over the food.
So it was a whole ritual, a way to honor those spirits.
It was. Now the key, it doesn't just talk theory. It gives you some real-world examples, shows you how to actually put this knowledge into action.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, so say someone stole something from you. The key has a method for figuring out who did it. You need a sieve, a piece of cord from someone who was hanged, blood, a brass basin filled with water from a spring, and you got to say these words: Dies mies yes chet bene dan fet donima medemaus. Then you need a green laurel twig and the sword of magical art.
That's quite the recipe.
Right. There's also a whole process for becoming invisible. You use specific invocations like Boles and a few others. You talk to a spirit called Almiras, mention Metatron, use wax images and the skin of a frog or a toad, bury some stuff, and carry around these specific figures.
Sounds complicated.
It is. And if you want to win someone's favor or get them to fall in love with you, there's an experiment for that too. Timing is everything. You got to do it on the right day, the right hour. And the writing tools, the incense, the stuff you sprinkle around, the specific names and characters you use, and the words you say, it all has to be just right. There's even a specific oration you have to recite, using names like Abies and Aladil and a bunch of others.
So there's a lot of room for error.
There is. But that's why the key is so detailed. It wants to make sure you get it right. Now, with all this power, you got to wonder about the ethics of it all.
Right. Like, does the key have any rules about how you can use this knowledge?
Oh, definitely. It's all over the text, warnings about using this stuff for evil. The preface, Book 1, Chapter 8, Book 1, Chapter 15, they all have these curses on anyone who misuses the name of God or uses this knowledge to hurt others.
Yeah, there are consequences.
Big time. And it stresses how important it is to be pure in body and mind if you want to do this safely and effectively. Chapter 15 especially talks about that. You can't just go blabbing about these secrets to anyone who'll listen. The preface, a note in Book 2 and Book 2, Chapter 6, they all warn against that. Don't share this with fools or people who don't understand. It's dangerous.
So it's like a sacred trust.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, Mathers, he didn't just include the key itself. He added some extra stuff to help people understand it better.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He included this ancient fragment of the Key of Solomon, translated by Eliphas Levi, that French occultist from the 1800s. This fragment links the key to the mysterious numbers of Yazira, which is like a core text of the Kabbalah.
So it's connecting it to a bigger system.
Right. And Levi, he had his own take on the hierarchy of spirits. He saw those traditional categories, the principalities, virtues, and powers, not as actual beings, but more like ranks or qualities. And the names like Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, to him, they were more like symbolic titles, representing different aspects of God's power.
So he was reading it through a Kabbalistic lens.
Exactly. And Mathers included Levi's own Kabbalistical invocation of Solomon, too, which is all about invoking the powers of the kingdom. It's like a different flavor of the same magic.
All right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the Key of Solomon, what are the biggest takeaways? What should folks remember?
Well, first off, this is a big deal historically. This book, it's been shaping Western occultism for centuries. It's like the blueprint. And the whole system of correspondences connecting the planets, the moon, the days and hours to specific magical goals, that's just amazing. And it really emphasizes ritual purity, preparation, both the spiritual and the practical.
So it's not just about waving a wand and saying a few words.
No way. And the power of divine names, those conjurations, that's a core part of it. But there's also a strong ethical framework. It's saying, hey, this power is serious, don't mess around with it.
Use it wisely.
Exactly. The Key of Solomon, it's a window into a whole different way of seeing the world, a world where those hidden forces are real and you can learn to work with them.
And for you listening, I want you to think about this. Why are we still so fascinated by books like this? What is it about these ancient texts, these ideas of magic and hidden knowledge, that keeps drawing us in? Is it just curiosity, or is there something more to it? Something about wanting to connect with something bigger than ourselves, maybe?
Mhm.
And how can we take those principles of focus, of intention, of preparation, and use them in our own lives, even if we're not trying to summon spirits?
Good questions.
I encourage you to keep exploring. Dive into the history of magic, learn about the Kabbalah, read the key for yourself, see what speaks to you. And thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Key of Solomon the King. We'll be back soon with another journey into the occult archives.